So good morning and welcome to LEAP Sidebar Cafe. My name's Cindy Lopez. I'm the founder of LEAP, Legal Education Access Pipeline. And I'll have Tiffany introduce herself.
Yes, my name is Tiffany Tao. I am a LEAP board member and pro bono manager at LAFLA, and excited to be here for this conversation this morning.
So I'm very excited. This is our first Sidebar Cafe for 2021.
Oh, that's right.
So Justice Liu, we're kind of setting the bar high with having a California Supreme Court justice on.
Slightly.
It's pretty amazing. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Justice Liu's background. So Justice Gordon Liu is an Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court. He was nominated by Governor Brown and sworn in on September 1st, 2011. Before joining the state's highest court, Justice Liu was a professor of law and associate dean at Berkeley School of Law. He is the son of Taiwanese immigrants. Justice Liu grew up in Sacramento, where he attended public schools. He went to Stanford and earned a bachelor's degree in biology, which, by the way, just FYI, not political science. So you can go to law school and have a science background. He then attended Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship and earned a master's in philosophy and physiology. Upon returning to the United States, he went to Washington, D.C. to help launch AmeriCorps, which is amazing. I love AmeriCorps. It's an amazing service program. And then he went to Yale. Yale Law School, He graduated in 1998, becoming the first in his family to earn a law degree, which I know many of you can relate to. He worked as a special assistant to the Deputy Secretary at the U.S. Department of Justice. By the way, Justice Liu, I would love to work there. Just and he went on to clerk. This is my favorite part of his bio. He went on to clerk for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg during the October 2000 term. I think that's amazing. Justice Liu, from 2001 to 2003, he worked in the litigation practice at O'Melveny and Myers in Washington, D.C. He continues to teach constitutional law, which was one of my favorite classes in law school. He's a visiting professor at Harvard and Stanford Law School. Now, Justice Liu is involved in quite a few organizations, too many to talk about today. But the one that really stands out to me, he's previously served on the California Commission on Access to Justice. So Justice Liu, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Since we are a diversity pipeline program, I thought this would be the best question to start with, which is discussing diversity in our profession. Mm-hmm. And I know that this is a huge interest for you. So what led you to that interest?
Yeah, well, I'm so pleased to be speaking to the LEAP fellows and the organization. This is a wonderful opportunity to reach out to some young people who I hope, will become lawyers in the future and be at the vanguard of our profession. I can remember even when I was in college, and sort of where most of you guys in the audience are sitting now. We were talking about many of the same things, actually, that people are still talking about now: multiculturalism, diversity, different kinds of conflicts and controversies. At that time, I had the good fortune of going to Stanford, and the big issue at that time was the curriculum. We used to have a freshman year requirement called, I kid you not, it was called Western Civilization. And the changing makeup of the campus was like, okay, that's good, but what about the rest of civilization?
Right.
Should we learn about that too? And so that was a big, debate, and very interesting. And then, fast forward now, 30 plus years, I'm still really interested in these issues of how our very multicultural country, can come together while also respecting our differences and figuring out how to find richness and strength in those differences. And being from California, I guess it's very hard to ignore these issues. They are all around us. And then in the legal profession, you realize there's a long way to go because, and it is changing. But in many places, especially in the top ranks of the profession, they're not nearly as diverse as the people who are coming up in it. And so we have to just figure out, how to have the profession, especially the leadership ranks, really be representative in a way of the people who are being served.
So one of the things that we talk about in LEAP, or it's always, I wouldn't even say in the background, but in the forefront, is really making sure that our fellows and future lawyers become agents of social change. So what can we do with LEAP and other similar organizations to empower our fellows to go beyond just practicing law and to become agents of social change?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it should be said that the very act of raising your hand to become a lawyer is already an act of social change, and so I commend all of you for taking that step or considering it because the profession needs you, and you're going to add a lot no matter what you do. I say to young people, as you're thinking about your career, I would encourage you to think broadly about your career options. Being an agent of social change doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be on the front lines of social justice in every single thing that you do. You don't have to work as a nonprofit advocate or a government attorney. Or I mean, it'd be great to do those things, and I definitely encourage it, but it just means that in whatever line of work you choose to do, whether you are a big partner at a law firm, or whether you work in a corporate counsel's office, or whether, as I did, I spent some, you find some time basically to leverage your immense position of privilege. And that's what it is, frankly, is that when you become a lawyer, it's a very privileged position in society. And you're entrusted with a set of public duties, and you should really think about those very seriously. That ranges from helping to represent populations that are underserved, and you can do that again in whatever capacity you are in as a lawyer, all the way to what I think of as a very important function today is educating friends and neighbors
Mhm.
about the rule of law, about the importance of the Constitution. And lawyers are uniquely privileged and responsible in a way for translating the language of the law and the country's values as they are enshrined in our laws, so that the rest of the population can understand and really appreciate those things. And if anything, we have learned how precious and fragile the rule of law is, and it really depends on a very, very dedicated set of people and norms that maintain that basic framework for our society. We can't legislate that. We can't decree that. That has to come from within, in a way, from within the society, and lawyers play a crucial role.
I'm glad that you mentioned that you don't, in order to be an agent of social change, you don't have to work, let's say at ACLU or
Right.
LAFLA or, in public interest. I really believe that we need more people making decisions. So big law or being on the board of a corporation where decisions are made. Because right now, all the decisions are being made by people who all look the same and they don't look like any of us right here. So, and
I
I
think
think,
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, which is that, it doesn't what life you end up in, but you carry with you a set of values and public responsibilities, and you see that, law firm partners and board members of big corporations, they are faced with all the same big issues. Actually, you look at what's going on in the society today, and just consider corporate America's response to the most recent set of events in our country. I mean, you can bet that all those people are talking about exactly the basic themes about social justice and rule of law that the people at the ACLU are talking about. So
mhm.
it's everywhere, and you're gonna, no matter what walk of life you end up in, you're gonna bring a lot if you bring that set of values and perspective and curiosity with you.
Absolutely. All right, Tiffany.
Yes. So, Justice Liu, first, I want to wish you and everyone who joined us this morning a very happy Lunar New Year.
Happy Lunar New Year.
Cindy and I are dressed for the occasion on accident. But I want to take a moment also to acknowledge that, it's usually a time of year, and it still is, where we are, like many of us in the API community are celebrating. And this year's a little different. There's celebration, but there's also a lot of fear. There's been some recent events in the news that are happening in our community, and our elders are being attacked. And having this conversation with you today, I wanted to kind of ask you, what do you think is the best way for us to work towards real change in our communities? Because there's been a lot of tension amongst leaders as to why the violence is happening, and a lot of different opinions. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, it's a major concern, and I don't know if any of you have had the chance to, see the videos that have surfaced about some of this. I mean, I've seen a few of them, and they are absolutely shocking and extremely disturbing. I can't really comment on individual cases, but I will just say that, watching the videos, like many people, the thought that runs through my mind is, that could have been my parents, that could have been my uncle, my auntie, so it's very personal to me, and I know it's very personal to a lot of people. I think that it's been healthy and good to see political leaders speak out on this. I just saw that the president and first lady issued a very good statement on video within the last 24 hours. I think national leadership like that really counts. I think our language that we use in politics really counts. And leadership from the very top is really important in setting the tone and making clear what is right and wrong when it comes to these acts of violence. They should be condemned, and I'm glad they are being condemned. I am also a little bit concerned, however, that it took this long, actually, for some of the attention to get focused on this problem. These issues are not new. We've been living with this, certainly since the very beginning of the pandemic, when Asian Americans have been scapegoated for the pandemic. And I mean, you can look at the statistics; they are absolutely shocking. The thousands upon thousands of incidents of hate crimes or harassment, more commonly harassment, verbal and otherwise, that have been happening in this country are absolutely shocking. And every time it happens, there needs to be a condemnation of this kind of behavior, because this is not how a tolerant and free society needs to conduct itself. But I think it even goes beyond that. I mean, the Asian American community throughout our history, I think, has faced problems of being targeted, being scapegoated, being otherized in some sort of way, being regarded as perpetual foreigners in this country. My parents have been American citizens for over 40 years. But I still fear for them because, of course, they speak another language. They dress a little differently. When they're outdoors, they don't look that different from the people you see in the videos who have been attacked, right? But they're Americans, and they deserve every bit of security, safety, and dignity that every other American deserves. And I worry, that without that message being reinforced day after day, that there are still conduct and attitudes out there that frankly give me pause. So I think this is a work in progress, and I'm glad to see some of these issues rise to greater prominence. But I would just say that Asian Americans have traditionally been, I think, somewhat invisible in our diversity discourse, and that needs to change, because here we're sitting in California where Asian Americans are 14, 15 or more percent of the population. And we are not invisible. And I think everyone needs to be seen and heard.
Thank you, Justice Sue. It's, not to connect it back, but going back to Cindy's original question about, diversity in the legal profession and why it's so important, why we do this here at LEAP. It just really resonates with me, your thoughts on this and how they are related. That, having folks from all kinds of backgrounds be lawyers and be in places at tables and having these conversations with folks in power is life-changing, life-saving.
I'll give you what on those lines. I'll give you one statistic, which hopefully will stick with all of you in the audience, and maybe shape the way you think about what you want to do in the law. So 3-4 years ago, I co-authored a report with some recent law students on it was the first comprehensive report on the progress of Asian Americans in the legal profession and outcomes in different sectors of the profession. And the one that really got me was about prosecutors. So we had a data bank of that someone else had collected of the 2,400 plus elected prosecutors in America. Okay, so these are like, local DAs, state attorneys general, anybody who is elected, top jobs, in other words, where all the discretion is vested, right? Out of 2,400 plus prosecutors in America, okay, this survey reported 5%, right? 5% minority of any kind in the whole United States. And then among these, how many do you think were Asian American? Well, this report said 12 individuals, right, out of 2,400. And we were so curious who these 12 people were that we got the underlying data and then called them to verify their identity and try to learn something based on 2016 data. We were only able to find 4 elected prosecutors in all of America who are Asian American. One of whom was Kamala Harris, actually, at that time, our state attorney general. The other 3, interestingly, one was Barbara Yook from Calaveras County, California. Another one was a guy named Sim Gill, who I think was in Salt Lake City, Utah. And the other guy was, I forget his name, but he was a prosecutor in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Wow.
In all of America that we could confirm. I mean, think about what we just were discussing, harassment, hate crimes against Asian Americans, and just place that against the background of who's in charge. And, you get the sense of how far we have to go in the legal profession.
Well, and I can add to that. I think in 2015 or 2016, Stanford did sort of a similar report, right? But it was just in California. It wasn't elected officials.
I saw it.
This was shocking. And when I was first developing LEAP, I was looking at data from across the country. And, I'm a lifelong prosecutor. I was in the AG's office my whole career. And I can tell you that government is a little more diverse than other areas. There's still a lot of work to be done. But in that report, they said that 84% of prosecutors across the state are white males. 84%. Now, the interesting thing is I have a lot of friends who are DAs in LA County who are very diverse. So I feel like LA County probably has the most diverse prosecutors, but 84%, that is shocking to me. That is shocking. And we need to change that. And I'm always talking to the fellows, prosecutors have a lot of power and a lot of influence. There's a lot of work to be done. So Justice Liu, I want to ask you about my favorite person. What was it like to clerk for Justice Ginsburg? And was she, I guess she wasn't RBG then. I think she was just probably Justice Ginsburg.
Yeah, I clerked for her in 2000, which is a long time ago. And this is well before her status kind of evolved. So Justice Ginsburg was a wonderful mentor and a very cherished friend. We remained in um, in regular touch, I think, throughout all of the the rest of her life. After I clerked for her, so I feel very lucky to have known her for 20 years. She, as a boss, was extremely meticulous and careful. She took great care with her writing. um, I have a story that one time, so what we do as clerks to her is, as is the usual job for clerks, we write memos to her about analyzing the cases that are in front of the court and give her our analysis and recommendation. And these are just internal memos. They don't really go anywhere. They're not published or anything like that. And so one day I was in her office collecting some paper. She wasn't there, and I noticed, on her desk or in a file, there was one of our internal memos, and it had these faint pencil markings on them that were catching like little typos and misplaced commas and changing a word here or there. And it was so interesting because she never returned these memos to us, you know, despite making all these marks. Like she never, talked to us about them afterwards. But I just realized like this was her way of processing material, that she could not read anything without, perfection in front of her eyes. And we were, of course, mortified as law clerks that we were turning things into her that were less than absolutely perfect. But that was a lesson that, you should, no matter what it is you're writing, it doesn't matter if it's going to be published or whatever, you better write it well. Um, she was like that. And she was extremely savvy and collegial, very good at kind of assessing the situation and figuring out what's the appropriate calibrated response. Um, you might recognize from the year in which I clerked that I clerked during the Bush versus Gore year. So it was a very difficult year in a
Oh my
lot of
gosh.
respects. And I saw the justice kind of up close during that period. And I can say that, she was a very, the paragon of sort of calm temperament and cool judgment. The rest of us, of course, were very exercised. We thought, wow, this is a, but she was very calm, cool, and collected from beginning to end, and was always thinking about collegiality and how to, both not only advance her own perspective on the case, of course, but also how to keep the court together. Because, she realized, unlike us, the law clerks who were only there for 1 year, she realized she has to work with these people after this case, and she has to work in an institution after this case, right? And so having to think about that layer, right, of considerations, she had those very much in the forefront of her mind.
Uriel has asked, what were the most rewarding and surprising aspects? Because just as you've talked about the rewarding, but did anything surprise you about clerking for Justice Ginsburg?
Well, I mean, it's hard to answer that. Everything was a surprise in the sense that there's
Hmm.
no experience quite like it. I mean, and I don't know what I could have done to prepare myself for no surprises. I mean, I'll say a couple other things. I mean, she has battled, very significant health problems, throughout certainly the last 20 years. And then, of course, she ultimately succumbed, to her cancer diagnosis, which, I mean, think about it, it was quite remarkable. When I clerked for her was just, I think, a year after she had first been diagnosed with colon cancer, and she was undergoing treatment even during the year in which I clerked. She was tough as nails. I mean, anybody who has ever been through it or had a family member go through it knows that, these are major life events, and they take a lot of your time. Physical, just the physical exhaustion, numerous procedures in the hospital, not to mention, the anxiety and the worry that come with having to, devote yourself to making yourself better. And she never missed a day of work. She never missed oral argument. if she was worried or anxious, she never let it show. I mean, she
Wow.
was just an absolute rock of tenacity and just iron will to get through this. And, and then she repeated the feat many, many times through other health challenges, so much so that I must say, like over the years, I became frankly a little bit desensitized almost to
Mm.
her cycles of, you'd see something reported in the press, and then 6 months later she'd be back on the bench, like nothing. I'll relay to you one funny story about that, which is that one time she told me that the public and the media became so obsessed about watching her health that she said one time I was on the bench, for oral argument, and at the end of argument, I was a little bit slow in getting up, to exit, through the back. And then I got a press inquiry. Why were you slow to get up? Is something wrong? And then she said, nothing had been wrong at all. I had just kicked off my shoes during oral argument. And I was having difficulty, putting one of my shoes back on. And so that was very
Oh,
humorous. But, so that was very her. And ultimately, of course, she did succumb to her cancer. But I I'm aware that she was completely working hard and still fighting all the way, basically to the end. I mean, she was still hard at work all the way up through the summer and into the fall of last year. So she lived a very, very full life and extremely tenacious. And that, just on a personal level, is a piece of inspiration for all of us.
Oh my gosh, I could ask you a million more questions. All right. Justice Lou, I know that there's probably a few people who are in the audience who might be thinking in the future that they would like to be a judge, whatever kind of judge. So how how would these students start their journey to the bench?
Mhm. There's no one formula for this because in this country, unlike in other systems around the world, there is a specific track to become a judge as opposed to a lawyer or something else. Am I still with you?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Um, and that's not true here because judges in America, of course, in the federal system, are appointed by political authority and then confirmed by political authority. And then in the state system, it varies quite a bit. Some judges are elected, and then some judges are appointed, right? In my case, I was appointed, and then appellate judges in California have to stand for election, but it's only a retention election, meaning no one runs against you. You're just put on the ballot. And the question is yes or no, should this person be retained in office? So in that respect, there is no formula for how to become a judge, because you have to be, if you get yourself elected, or you have to be appointed in some way. Well, what do people look for? Well, the first and most important thing people look for is a record of accomplishment in the law. Along with good temperament, integrity, and all the basic character traits that people expect in a judge. So as a baseline proposition, whatever you do in your legal career, be good at it, and demonstrate the personal qualities, right, that are necessary to be a judge. The ones that you think would naturally come to mind: fairness, objectivity, treating others well, being respectful, being courteous, listening well to the other side, treating even, your, or especially, one should say, your opposing counsel, the people who are on the other side of you on any particular matter, with respect. Those are the qualities that people look for, in a judge. That, though, the way people become judges, they know community in some way, either through their bar associations, their community service activities. Sometimes, in my case, for example, when I was a professor, through my scholarship in writing and speaking, right? And so you have to kind of extend yourself a little bit. You can't just sit in your office and hope that your work kind of speaks for itself and shines through. So there is a bit of art of self-promotion involved. And it's less a business of self-promotion as it is needing to get out of your office, not just, being a good worker bee, but, meeting people, networking, developing personal relationships, showing some leadership in organizations, volunteering for things, right? Helping to organize events. Those are the ways in which people come to see you, right, as a active participating member in the community. And that's important too, because judges, as you recognize, are not just the kind of legal decision makers. They also occupy an important role in the community that goes beyond that. They're seen as kind of, pillars of their community who exemplify certain kinds of values, and they're expected, to participate, just as I'm participating with you this morning, in communicating about the work of the law and inspiring, hopefully, the next generation of people, these kinds of things. And so those are some of the things that people look for in being a judge. And again, it doesn't matter what walk of life you choose. People have become judges from every angle, big law attorneys to government attorneys. I was a professor when I became a judge. Other people have been practicing lawyers in the government, prosecutors. That's probably the more common path. But as you see from the Biden administration, they're making an emphasis on people who are done public defender roles, civil rights work. So it's a very, very broad palette in the way we do it in this country. And so doesn't matter what walk of the profession you choose, but I gave you some of the characteristics that people are looking for no matter what job you actually have.
And Justice Lou, we have a pretty specific question about law schools and what kind of law school or what tier of law school. Specifically, is it more difficult to become a judge if you go to a tier 3 or tier 4 law school?
Not necessarily. I say that from the standpoint that, if you look across, just to take an example, across all the justices with whom I have served on the California Supreme Court, there's a variety, of schools represented there. And I think, let's set aside the rankings for a second. What's important is there's legal talent everywhere you go, all up and down the rankings. And what's important is, no matter what law school you go to, you can still have a very satisfying career. You obviously have to work hard and figure out, the path that enables you to be the best lawyer that you can be. But being involved in your community, that's something anyone can do. It doesn't matter what law school you attended. And in fact, I'm not even sure there's a big correlation between how fancy the law school you attended is and how active people are in the community. In fact, I might even draw the opposite inference, which is that to the extent that the fancy law schools draw people from a more national pool, those people, I don't know actually what they go on to do on any systematic level, but to the extent that some of the less fancy schools draw people from their local communities, maybe they
Right.
create a greater culture, right, of participating in those communities.
Right.
I happen to know, for example, that Southwestern Law School, where I had the honor of giving the commencement address a few years ago, I was told during my visit there that they have an extremely good track record of generating a lot of the local judges in LA County. And why is that? It makes complete sense. It's because Southwestern is a school that's focused on that community, has a very dense and tight network of people, in that community, and that's what you need, right, to get recognized is a network and people who communicate with each other and hold each other up, and promote each other. And so, I think that's an excellent question, but I don't think that anybody should count themselves out just because they feel like they're going to a less fancy law school than another.
We wanted to get, some more advice from you, specifically, from your view from the bench, and some practice tips that you might be able to share. Would you mind sharing any thoughts you have on some of the things that make for a strong oral argument?
Unlike other courts in America, including the U.S. Supreme Court, we have long had live internet broadcast of our our proceedings, which I think is great from a civics point of view. So if
Mhm.
you want to watch, just come to our website, and you can get the schedule there as to when the next oral argument is. In fact, the next one is the first Tuesday in March. Just tune in, and you can see how oral argument works. The best oral arguments sound like a conversation. They sound like a conversation between the court and the lawyer. It doesn't sound like an interrogation. It doesn't sound like kind of a staccato Q&A. It sounds like what we're doing here, which is more like just talking. And a well-prepared attorney, right, is able to seize on what the justices are really concerned about and respond to those questions, as opposed to coming in with some kind of script and being determined to read the entire script. That usually doesn't work very well, because the whole point of having the oral argument is to provide more spontaneous exchange about things that are really on the minds of the justices. And if we wanted a script, we already have that, because they've already filed briefs, they've already made arguments on paper. So the attorney should expect that the questions are about things that have already been thought about by the justices based on the papers, and taking the ball from there.
So to that, regarding oral argument and briefs, what percent of cases would you say you have changed your mind based on the oral argument?
It happens very infrequently. And the reason for that, this may sound disappointing to the lawyers, but think about it. I mean, the lawyers have submitted, huge briefs before the case even gets to argument. And the thought that you are somehow going to present some sort of epiphany at oral argument that you did not present on paper just is not realistic. Most of appellate practice in America in the present day is on paper. This did not used to be the case. So if you go back to the early history of this country, if you look at the early, cases that, at the founding era, Chief Justice John Marshall and all of those folks, they had a lot of presentation orally. And so, the way those cases are reported in the books, you would see, Mr. Stennis for the respondent, and then there would be a whole set of paragraphs summarizing what he said, right? And this would go on for hours, right? Probably, you can think that maybe some of that practice was conditioned on the fact that they didn't have word processing then, and
Yes.
the printed word actually was not as easy to come by. Today, of course, we have paper, without limit in a way. And so it's rare, I think, that people feel like oral argument somehow like raises something that they didn't think about. It may cause you actually to slightly, I mean, most cases that we get are very nuanced and have many different moving parts. And it may cause you to direct your attention more to certain parts rather than others, or if you are writing the opinion, to emphasize certain things rather than others. I have actually seen, though, cases that do flip after oral argument. It happens, every so often. It does happen. So as I have told advocates too, I think that although it's very hard to win your case, in oral argument, it is quite easy to lose your case.
As a former appellate lawyer, I can tell you at the AG's office, we spend so much time on mock appellate arguments, and I mean, not as much for the Court of Appeal, but definitely for the Supreme Court. And I mean, I've known this for years, that the oral argument doesn't change the minds of a lot of the justices, but it is kind of disappointing because we spend so much time preparing for it.
And we have another question that I really want to ask you, Justice Liu, with respect to institutional changes in the environment of the profession. Do some professionals in the legal field experience some racial pushback, like microaggressions and prejudice? And if so, then what are some of the ways to overcome this?
It's a hard question, and the answer is yes, of course they do. And this is I mean, it shows up in a lot of different ways. If you look at some of the survey results, again, going back to the study we did on Asian Americans in legal profession, the good news is that we did do a survey in that study of 600 some odd Asian American lawyers. Most people, by large numbers, said that they did not experience overt discrimination. But if you ask whether they experience implicit discrimination of various kinds, a majority of them said yes, and especially women attorneys. And I imagine you'd find similar data for African Americans, for Latino attorneys, for women generally in the profession. There's a long way to go. How do you deal with this? Well, I think, this is one of the hardest questions that faces the internal culture of the legal profession.
Yeah.
The most important thing, I think, is that the leadership of organizations, and this is again where, going back to Cindy's remark and mine earlier, that it doesn't matter where you end up in the legal profession. These are, again, opportunities to exercise leadership everywhere you go, whether it's big law or, the ACLU or whatever it is. The leadership of organizations needs to make clear that subtle or implicit or unconscious forms of stereotyping, discrimination, and unfair treatment are not to be tolerated in the organization, and that the organization, generally has to be one that is working towards being aware of and trying to eliminate these. And I will just say they are very prevalent and naturally human tendencies, right? I'm doing a lot of work these days on implicit bias, including a project with the National Academy of Sciences right now. And, the whole notion of implicit bias is that it's unconscious. It's not something that um, is that we may even be aware of, right? That we are doing, because it just rests on the natural human tendency to develop categories in order to process the world around us. It's just that some categories are innocuous and some are less so, and we have to be, mindful of this. And so I just think it starts with leadership at the top to set a tone and a culture that makes people aware that this exists, and to constantly be on the lookout for it and to mitigate the effects of it. And I think, probably some of the hardest situations that you all include, and I include myself in this, will face in career life is that when you hear a comment made in a meeting room, or when you hear in a social interaction in a cocktail party, somebody say something that is a little bit amiss, how do you react, right? How many of us have had that experience of like hearing something and then you didn't say anything at the time, and then like 2 hours later, you're like, dang, I should have said something, or that really bothered me. I shouldn't have let that go. Um, that's hard, and I don't have a great answer, but you ought to think about, how you can be a positive force in those situations, either countering in a subtle, perhaps deflecting way, like what the person who made the errant comment said, or perhaps even approaching the person later and said, I know you didn't intend it this way, but you might want to be aware that your remark came across this way. Something, but just something to um, you know uh, uh, make a small contribution, in essence, to the eradication, I think, of a very, I think, prevalent, and I would say, I use the word natural not to make it okay, but I'm just saying this is a very human tendency, and it shouldn't be one that deters us from trying to address it from the standpoint of feeling like, oh, some people are really blameworthy and they're at fault and they're bad people. No, it's not like that at all. I think this is, when you're talking about prejudices, stereotypes, and implicit bias, it's something that affects all of us, present company included. And so we all have to be on the lookout for it.
Justice Liu, I'm going to bring one more student on, even though she doesn't know it. Valentina?
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Justice Lou, for taking the time to talk with us.
Absolutely.
It's great. And just hearing, your accomplishments is super inspiring. And I guess just kind of my question is reflecting back on just why you entered the legal profession and, all your accomplishments throughout your career. what has been one of, I guess, the most satisfying moments where you can look back and reflect like, oh, this is why I did it, or this is why I got into this profession?
Mm, that's hard. So I mean, let me just say first of all that when I was sitting in your shoes, most of you, some of you who are still in school, in college, or even just beyond college and deciding what to do, I did not come to law until much later in life. I mean, I was 4 years between college and law school, and only after 1.5 years after college did I even apply to law school. When I was in college, I mean, somewhat stereotypically, I thought I was pre-med, and I thought I was going to go to medical school. And
Mm.
I left college having applied to medical school and been admitted, and I deferred my admission for other opportunities. But I
Wow.
was going to go, right? So I was 100% like the whole way, and only like at the last second, in a way, did I change course. And I think I changed course largely because I knew that I always had passions in the social justice area. Like I said earlier in the conversation, I've always had interests in diversity and civil rights, and I just actually didn't know what career could enable me to actually act on those values and interests that I had, until I, had some excellent mentors who took me aside and said, you really should think about law. I didn't have anybody in my family who was a lawyer, and I don't think I had, that much of a horizon in terms of understanding even what lawyers did. It's just everyone is born with a certain set of circumstances, and obviously I don't fault my parents for that, but it's just that that's just the world in which I lived in. I didn't have that perspective, so I came to it late, and I'm glad I made the choice because it certainly has fit with my overall kind of interests and things that motivate me in life. And that's important to do something, I mean, we are very lucky people to do things we love. Not everyone, I would say, even not most people in society have that opportunity. Most people work because they have to, and they make a living, doing it. So it's a great luxury to do something that you love. Satisfying moments, there are many. In my teaching career, I mean, I know it sounds corny to say, but every class I taught was a satisfying moment. I love teaching. I love working with students. I love seeing what becomes of them. And many of them have kept in touch over the years, and that's extremely gratifying. They're now, whatever. I mean, many of them are law professors themselves, or they're partners in big law firms, or they've gone on to elected office. It's fabulous to see, and I like the idea that I played a small part, in their development. On the bench, many cases. I'll just give you one example. Early in my tenure, there was a case about there was a murder case actually from San Bernardino County, in which there was a very disputed piece of evidence that led to a person's conviction. That evidence was based on a bite mark. Bite marks, it turns out, have become discredited in forensic science. They don't have much reliability, if any at all. And the experts who testified for the prosecution recanted their testimony. The question, when the case came to us, is whether the recantation of that evidence was false evidence within the meaning of the false evidence statute that exists in California to give defendants relief, based on false evidence being introduced at their trial. The court, in a narrowly divided decision, decided 4-3 that it was not within the ambit of the statute, and I dissented. That dissent led to legislation that was passed to expand the false evidence statute to encompass this kind of problem and to make it clear. And then that defendant refiled a petition for relief under the new statute, and then in a 7-0 vote in our court, won his case, and he was released from prison after serving 23 years, which was essentially, a wrongful conviction. And so that opened my eyes a little bit to, I'm not saying that's what I do every single day, but, I'm saying that, those are the kinds of things that do come across my desk. And from time to time, you asked about satisfying things, like being able to have a small part in the human dramas, that every case represents, I think is an enormous honor and a privilege.
Thank you so much, Justice Liu. And we're watching the time. I don't know if you have a quick moment before we let you go for a piece of advice for our fellows.
I mean, my advice to you is to follow your passions. That sounds so trite, but I want to remind you of one thing, which is that so many lawyers that I know, including, people who are my contemporaries, my classmates, it is a shame if you look at the survey results across the profession that so many lawyers are unhappy with what they do. I mean, and it is to a degree that's higher than other professions, the level of the prevalence of dissatisfaction. In my mind, I sort of think there really is no reason this needs to be. We're dealing here with very smart people who have choices in terms, largely. I mean, you have to pay off your debts, you have to support your family. I'm aware, there are financial constraints that people have. But by and large, being a lawyer is a tremendous privilege in society. And so when I urge you to find your passion and follow your passion, it really means, find something that makes you happy to do. And, sometimes it's going to be hard because your family may expect you to do certain things. The status markers in society may expect you to do certain things. I would say if you apply to law school and you eventually become a lawyer, keep your law school application essay in the top drawer of your desk at all times. And remind yourself from time to time what you told the admissions officers about why you wanted to be a lawyer. And then measure that against what you're doing from time to time. And remind yourself, why it is that you chose this path. And if you can stay true to that, you will have a happy career.
Oh my gosh.
I got goosebumps.
I totally have goosebumps. And it's so perfect timing because we have our alums who are just applying to law school and our second cohort who will be applying this year. Oh my gosh, Justice Liu. Oh, that does give me the goosebumps. That's a perfect ending.
Great.
Yes.
Perfect.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with both of you. I'm sorry I have to run, but
No problem.
time
Thank you.
spent. And good luck to everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody. I'm so